Grand Cayman is not much to look at, either on the map, where it is a pinprick in the expanse of blue to the south of Cuba and the west of Jamaica, or in reality, where it is a coral-reefed island barely 20 miles long and a couple of miles in width. With smallness come some advantages, amongst them a degree of immunity to the hurricanes that roar through the Caribbean each year. Jamaica is a large and tempting target for these winds, and is hit quite regularly. There is no justice in the storms that flatten the houses of the poor in places like Kingston or Port Antonio, wood and tin constructions so much more vulnerable than the bricks and mortar of the better off. Grand Cayman, being relatively minuscule, is usually missed, although every few decades the trajectory of a hurricane takes it straight across the island. Because there are no natural salients, much of the land is inundated by the resultant storm surge. People may lose their every possession to the wind. Cars, fences, furniture and fridges, animals too, can all be swept out to sea and never seen again. Boats end up in trees. Palm trees bend double and are broken with as much ease as one might snap a pencil or the stem of a garden plant. Grand Cayman is not fertile. The soil, white and sandy, is not much use for growing crops, and indeed the land, if left to its own devices, would quickly revert to mangrove swamp. Yet people have occupied the island for several centuries and scratched a living there. The original inhabitants were turtle hunters. They were later joined by various pirates and wanderers, for whom a life far away from the prying eye of officialdom was attractive. There were fishermen, too, as this was long before overfishing was an issue, and the reef brought abundant marine life. Then, in the second half of the 20th century, it occurred to a small group of people that Grand Cayman could become an offshore financial centre. As a British territory, it was stable, relatively incorrupt, by the standards of Central America and the shakier parts of the Caribbean, and its banks would enjoy the tutelage of the City of London. Unlike some other states that might have nursed similar ambitions, Grand Cayman was an entirely safe place to store money. "Sort out the mosquitoes," they said. "Build a longer runway. The money'll flow in. You'll see. Cayman will take off." Cayman, rather than the Cayman Islands, is what people who live there call the place, an affectionate shortening, with the emphasis on the man rather than the K. Banks and investors agreed, and Georgetown became the home of a large expatriate community, a few who came as tax exiles, but most of them hard-working and conscientious accountants or trust managers. The locals watched with mixed feelings. They were reluctant to give up their quiet and rather sleepy way of life, but found it difficult to resist the prosperity the new arrivals brought. And they liked, too, the high prices they could get for their previously worthless acres. A tiny whiteboard home by the sea, nothing special, could now be sold for a price that could keep one in comfort for the rest of one's life. For most, the temptation was just too great. An easy life was now within grasp for many Caymanians, as Jamaicans could be brought in to do the manual labor, to serve in the restaurants frequented by the visitors from the cruise ships, to look after the bankers' children. A privileged few were given status, as they called it, and were allowed to live permanently on the islands, these being the ones who were really needed, or, in some cases, who knew the right people, the people who could ease the passage of their residence petitions. Others had to return to the places from which they came, which were usually poorer, more dangerous, and more tormented by mosquitoes. Most children do not choose their own name, but she did. She was born Sally, and was called that as a baby, but at about the age of 4, having heard the name in a story, she chose to be called Clover. At first her parents treated this indulgently, believing that after a day or two of being Clover she would revert to